what I'd like us to do for tonight is realize that as we were in Philippi and Corinth last week, the what came to mind is we haven't talked about the Jerusalem church for quite a while. And so I kind of pictured Paul's long distance relationship with the Jerusalem church. And when I Googled long distance relationship, this image is what came up. Doesn't that work for Paul and the Jerusalem church? Good night, my love, sweet dreams. Have a great day. Love you. With an earbud in. Uh, that's not exactly it. Things weren't exactly chummy between Paul and the Jerusalem church, but I don't think he knew that until he got there. So we're going to retrace just so that we can reconnect with the mothership a little bit. We're going to retrace tonight back to chapter 21 of Acts and then make our way through the action and the drama that takes us from there to where we see Paul at the finish in chapter 28. And so, while Paul was in Philippi, while he was in Corinth, all of his travels, he was remembering the Jerusalem church. Because in Galatians, you can see it here, the third to the last of the quotations on this page, third to the last bullet, when he went and kind of reported to the church in Jerusalem when they were still a little leery of him, and he gave his gospel to them, they approved according to Galatians chapter 1 and 2. And all they said was, as long as you remember the poor, by which they meant, as you're going to the more well-to-do regions, remember the poor churches of Jerusalem and Judea. The economic situation is different for them. The financial situation is different. So they implore Paul, remember us, and he says, and that I was glad to do. Well, he was right. He was glad to do it. He installed a habit of giving as he went from church to church, partly to keep his word about Jerusalem, but partly to keep reminding the new churches in all of the places that he went, in Turkey, in Greece, and in Macedonia, all of the different churches he went to, he wanted them to know that they were a part of something bigger. And so in Romans, he says, in chapter 15, I'm on my way to Jerusalem in the service of the Lord's people there. For Macedonia and Achaia were pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem. That's Paul in his letter to the Romans, reporting to them that he's getting ready to go back to Jerusalem and take the cash with him, take the collection from these churches in the Greek peninsula. In 1 Corinthians 16, now about the collection for the Lord's people. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. He goes on to describe the same kind of collection as Romans describes. Then in 2 Corinthians, the Macedonian churches gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. So this collection has been on Paul's mind. He hasn't been unaware of the Jerusalem church. In fact, he thinks of them a lot, and he's built it into his habits with the churches he's serving. That much from Paul's side in the letters, but does Acts know about it? Does Luke know about it? Well, in that second to last bullet, Luke has Paul say in a speech in chapter 24 that he is carrying alms for his nation, collecting alms for his nation, which seems to refer to the same collection. And in 24:26, when he's under Felix in Caesarea, Felix somehow knows he has a lot of money because Felix thinks if he squeezes Paul, he can get a bribe out of him. All of that to say, there are little breadcrumbs in Acts, and there are very explicit things in Paul's letters that tell us he has had his mind on the beloved Jerusalem church and the poor churches of Judea. And so from his end, there may be a romantic comedy thing going on, right? They've had their meet cute, and he's now away. They've faced the challenge to the relationship of distance, but maybe he's going to go back to Jerusalem, and they'll receive him and run across a field and throw their arms around one another because he's bringing this gift, and I'm sure he has visions of all this. But look what happens. I've tried to characterize how Paul might feel with this photograph of this young woman locked out of a house. When we arrived at Jerusalem, this is Luke again in Acts 21:17-22. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. Now compare that to what happens now, because Luke sometimes makes these blanket statements, and then you have to hear what comes after it to really get to this. It's kind of a Minnesota nice-ish thing, or a Southern God bless you kind of thing. He can sometimes summarize a little bit formulaic, but then watch what happens next. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James. Now remember, this is James, the brother of Jesus, the head of the Jerusalem church, and all the elders were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. That's another one of Luke's formulaic statements. But now listen. Then they said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They've been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. What shall we do?" Now, the first line is Luke summarizing when they heard this, they praised God, but the tone of this is definitely not God praising tone. This is James and others, the elders, saying, "We've heard about the gospel that you're preaching, and we don't particularly like it. It's causing trouble among us because these Jews who have come to faith among us are skeptical of the way you're teaching Gentiles how to enter." Now, I thought this was all solved. Alan thought this was all solved 3 weeks ago when we were in Acts 15, and we had the Council of Jerusalem, and we had the circumcision party versus the Paul and Barnabas and Peter party, who were one for the circumcision and the law, and the other were for the Gentiles not being burdened by that. And James, remember, made his pronouncement that we will not lay this burden on the Gentiles that we haven't been able to bear. Right. So after the Acts 15 council, you would have come away thinking, okay, we can wash our hands of that whole situation. That's solved. But in 21, we learned not so much. If they announced that in Acts 15, it didn't solve all the issues that were going to come up between Jewish Christianity and Gentile Christianity. And here we see it when Paul returns to Jerusalem. It's not exactly lovers running across a field to embrace one another. There's tension here. He's not roundly received by the Jerusalem church and its elders.